Okay, welcome to the show. I'm Rob Steele, your host, and joining me today is Kyle Hagge from Morning Brew. Welcome to the show, Kyle. It's awesome
Yeah,
to
thanks
have
for having me,
you.
Rob.
Yeah, really excited to unpack some of your experiences and insights as Chief of Staff at Morning Brew. You've landed an awesome role, right? Chief of Staff at Morning Brew, fantastic, scaling media empire, shall I say? What
hmm
was the path to this role that led you here, and why did you decide to take the role on?
Yeah, so I had internal transition to this role. So I actually was working at Morning Brew before being the chief of staff here. I've been at Morning Brew for a little over 4 years, started as a community manager on this kind of startup within a startup business unit that we were building that was all around creating mini MBA courses for our audience. Became director of community of that business unit. And then we shut that unit down in November of 2023. And at that point, Morning Brew had asked me to stay, which was awesome. I love the company and really think about like what role I would like, what role I thought the business needed. Obviously, the CEO at the time, Austin, had thoughts about where I could be deployed. So, thought long and hard about what I wanted to do at Morning Brew and really wanted a role that was broad in scope and could impact many different elements of the business. And that kind of led me to gravitating towards a chief of staff position. And then at the same time, we were bringing on someone who was consulting with us for a while into a full-time COO role. His name is Robert DePel, really awesome media leader and person. And I had a lot of conversations with Robert and really wanted to work for him in particular. And so became his chief of staff. At the time, he was COO. Fast forward about a year, and Austin, the co-founder and CEO at the time, had decided to become chairman and step away from the CEO role. Robert became CEO, and so now I'm chief of staff to the CEO at Morning Brew, and we're off to the races.
Yeah. Did you come up with the role, the chief of staff role, or was it something that sort of came from Austin or somebody else in the business that took it to you?
Yeah, we did not have a chief of staff role period at the time. So me and then chief of staff counterpart I have at the company, who really works with the revenue org, Jacqueline, she was talking to our CRO at the time. And we felt there was a need for a chief of staff for the CRO too. And so some conversations we're having kind of in parallel. But yeah, I was the first chief of staff at Morning Brew. And so it was not something that we had built in the past. So it was pretty fun because we could think about how to really make sure that this role was a good fit for not just the organization, but also for me and my unique skills. So far, so good.
Yeah. What were the challenges of being the first chief of staff? Like, first in the function, in the role, in the business. Was there anything unique or novel that you faced?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think like anything, the first role, whether it's chief of staff or anything at a company, you don't have a blueprint or a process or a protocol to follow. A lot of people at the company aren't going to know necessarily even what your remit is because they don't have any past experience with dealing with the chief of staff at the company. And so a lot of it is invention and being really thoughtful about making sure the role is the right fit for the right person to drive the right impact of the business. You have to be really thoughtful about that. Yeah, I think the second challenge is getting people up to speed about what a chief of staff role will look like at your company. And then, I think the third challenge or opportunity is like any chief of staff, typically you have to get really good at kind of developing influence without authority. And so you're going to start working with a lot of teams because of the cross-functional nature of the role, but they don't report to you and they've been doing their particular function for a long time, hopefully very well. And so being able to respect that, to come in and to form strong relationships with leaders across the company, to be able to understand why they do what they do and the best practices that they're deploying, and then ultimately like serve them and help them drive their business unit forward. And when appropriate, have your own perspective that might be like an outside in perspective that's really valuable to them, but making sure you've done the due diligence and built the relationship for that outside in perspective to actually land.
Yeah, that's super, super important. Based on your experiences, like you came from a community background, as you mentioned sort of earlier, what are your superpowers and your kryptonite, right? Like, what are the sort of skills, the experiences that you brought to the table that was really unique that added value to this role, to the business? And what were the things that was like your kryptonite? What were What were the things you had to learn on the?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I wouldn't say I don't think of things in terms of like, superpowers and kryptonite. I would think of things just in general as like very spiky traits. And what I mean by spiky traits is things that like you're just over indexed on. So for me, that might be like enthusiasm. I think I'm a very enthusiastic person. Like that is like high energy. I love public speaking. I get very excited about things. Now, is that a superpower or kryptonite? Depends. It depends on the situation that you're in. In some cases, enthusiasm is a game changer, and in some cases it might be your downfall. The second thing I would say is like sensitivity. I'm like a very like sensitive person. When people are like, I don't care what people think, that's not me. I totally care what people think about me. And so that again is probably a huge superpower when it comes to building relationships with people and like really feeling like, EQ, like a sense of how people are doing and wanting people to feel good and being able to modulate your behavior in order to get that outcome for them. And in some cases, like it can be a weakness. Obviously, if you have to lay off someone or you have a difficult conversation and you're over indexed on that, maybe you're afraid to do it. And so you have to, again, modulate your own behavior to overcome that particular context where that would be considered a weakness. And I also think I'm super curious. Like I read a ton of different books from different genres. I listen to an insane amount of podcasts. I could like go to like any part of the business and I'm fascinated by it. I'm not like, oh, that's boring. I'm like, oh my God, like how does this work? Tell me more. So again, huge superpower if you're in a role that's very broad because you need that curiosity and you need to be able to connect and collect dots all across the org. It can be a weakness if your job is to be highly, highly, highly specialized in one particular subdomain, and any time spent being curious about anything else is actually bad. So with that being said, like it's just about understanding what your spiky traits are and then making sure you're setting yourself up to be put in context where those spiky traits are superpowers in that context and not weaknesses. And I think for me, like that is what a chief of staff role is. Like it does require you to care about what people think. And you have to form really strong relationships cross functionally. I think it does require a level of enthusiasm, particularly when you're working on projects that are cross functional. You kind of need to have like an energy to keep them going and an enthusiasm to keep people motivated. And then I would definitely say it requires curiosity. You're going to be working broadly on very, many different projects, some of which like maybe don't seem too sexy, but are critically important. And if you're not curious and can't stay motivated to keep doing them, you're not going to do well.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. I think any superpower can become a kryptonite if you overplay your hand. Right? It's about deploying these skills and attributes in the right place at the right time in the right sort of sequence.
Yeah. And I think what's powerful about this framing for the audience is I think a lot of times we spend our time like almost thinking of like we don't think about the traits that are like spiky for us. We think about the random times where we've been in context and like discovered that a spiky trait was a superpower. And so I think oftentimes people are like, oh, I'm not a good at this thing. It's just because you were in a context where like you weren't good at that thing. It doesn't mean that you're bad or like you can't do a good job anywhere. And I think this just deep understanding of like we all have unique talents. And the first step is identifying what those talents are. The second step is just finding the right fit. And that's really what we're all searching for in life, whether it's a romantic partner, a friend, a job. It's just about fit. Like you find the right person and your relationship is booming. You find the wrong person and the relationship sucks. It doesn't mean you're the bad people. It doesn't even mean you're good people either. It just means that isn't the right fit. And so I think having that lens on life and on career about fit is really important.
Yeah, it's the fit and the purpose, right, which is super important for the chief of staff, right? With the business, the culture, and the principle that you're supporting, right? It's super important. How do
Yeah.
you go about developing and building trust, not just with the principal, but as you said, the other sort of functional leaders in the business, right? So that you can develop those effective relationships and partnerships to drive the strategy or get closer to the vision?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I have a very simple answer, which is, I think trust is like earned, not given. And trust is a function of time and the percentage of things you've done that you said you were going to do. So if you want to build trust with someone, like one, it's going to take time. Like The more time you know someone and get to know someone, the more you tend to trust them. And the second is, again, it's percent of what you said you were going to do. What did you actually do it? And I think we overcomplicate it. Like my boss, the CEO, says this all the time. It's like, just do what you say you're going to do. And that solves pretty much most problems in life. And so, yeah, if you want to build trust, like do what you say you're going to do. I think the other element is like, if you have to have a direct conversation with someone, like go have that conversation with them and don't, gossip or like back channel about it. Just confront the problem head on. I think most people respect that and then trust that you're telling them the truth, whether it's the good, the bad, or the ugly. Yeah. And then the last part is like, if you're trying to build trust with your principal, I think doing all those things, but then also like coming to them early with any issues or warnings. Like in general, it's kind of like a performance review. Like the goal is no surprises. And so the least surprises you can throw at your principal, the better.
Yeah, 100% agree. In terms of the value of the chief of staff role to a principal in the business, right? How do you go about articulating that, the value or the impact that it can bring or is bringing to the business, right? We're going through some volatile times, right? How do you measure that, the impact
Yeah.
multiple that the chief of staff can deliver in an organization?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say, if you're excuse me, if you're listening and you're not even a chief of staff, like this is probably the number one question you need to answer if you're in any role in any organization, which is like, yeah, if we enter volatile times and things get tight and tough decisions have to be made, it's a pretty simple formula that companies do, which is like, how much do I pay this person? How much do they cost and how much do they add? And if you add more than you cost, you stick around. And if you don't, you tend to get laid off. And whether that's right, wrong, or otherwise, I think it's the truth. And so if you want to grow in your career, if you want to demand a higher salary, if you want to increase your chances of staying put, or staying employed, being able to articulate your value is critically important. And
Yeah.
so, again, chief of staff or otherwise, that's what you do. So, like, I would break it down. Like, you want to make your job less fuzzy and more quantifiable. So, like, what do you do that touches revenue? Like, I think going back to like startups where people say, like, you either build or you sell, and that's it. Like, that's kind of it abstracted many different levels as the company grows. So, like, how do you directly influence revenue? Whether that's like, okay, I organize a weekly training series, and this training series has touched on these 10 things over the past 3 months. And of those 10 things, I looked at what was happening before the training, and post what happened after the training. And after the training, we saw an increased number of, RFPs or whatever the thing is you're doing in the business that generated X number of dollars. Like, boom, that's data point number one. I reorganized this entire workflow and it saved engineers this number of hours, and they were able to deploy now to this new project, and that new project led to X number of dollars. Boom, data point number two. So yeah, it's not like you're the one necessarily, you're not in the sales team, so you might not be the one signing the contract or getting the dollars personally, but your ability to articulate how you enable the sales team to do that or whatever it might be is very, very, very important. And you should be doing that, irregardless of your role.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think the quantifying that impact, whether it's direct or influenced or enabled is super important. How do you look at the softer side of things? Like, let's say culture and the value that brings to an organization. How do you go about, articulating the value around that side?
Of articulating the value of culture at an organization.
Yeah, like the positive impact that you could have within an organization to take the culture and the values that is partnering with the CEO or, driving within the business or supporting and
Yeah.
enabling.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's, culture is like very important. And I think it could be have a whole other podcast, but on like culture versus strategy or culture eats strategy and all that type of stuff. But it's very important. And to me, like, whatever you call it, I think culture, one of the benefits is like decentralized decision making. So if you have a really strong culture and people understand like what's expected of them and how we operate, then when you're in a situation where you have to make a decision, You don't need to go to someone else to ask permission or to like see what to do. The culture is so strong that you know what you need to do. You know, depending on the organization, that culture is going to change. I also think culture is really important from a like magnetism perspective of attracting the people you want in your organization and keeping the people you don't want away. And so I think any kind of company principles, if they're done right, shouldn't actually be attractive to everyone. It's going back to the fit question. Like, you want people to read your company principles and like opt out if they're not for them and like be really excited if they are for them, because then you're finding high fit people. If you make it so like everyone likes your culture, like your corporate principles, like then you're attracting everyone, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing. But when they actually come to work, like, okay, you put this principles up, but like, what do you actually do? And how do you find people that aren't a right fit for you? Doesn't make them bad, doesn't make you bad, but it just means it's not the right fit. So I think that's, you know, super important. And then just from a day-to-day thing, like culture is also like, it's what you do and what you say, but I think it's also like, it is really what you do. And so do you show up every day? Are you living the values that you say you are? Are you going the extra mile? Are you showing an ownership mentality? Like all the things that we say we want everyone to do, like look in the mirror. Are you doing it? And if so, like that's great. You're a good example and people are going to mirror what you do. And if not, like, you know, fix that first.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. AI is reshaping, a bunch of industries, including media, right? At Morning Brew, is there anything you're doing to integrate AI? Either specifically you as the chief of staff, or you're using AI to boost your creativity and impact, or other people in the organization?
Yeah, it's a really great question, you know, kind of an obvious one at this point because everyone is thinking about AI and talking about AI. There's a lot of different ways to take it. I would say like on a personal use case level, I use Claude or, you know, like ChatGPT. I'm personally a Claude Pro user all the time. And so I think if you're not using one of those generative AI chatbots at this point, like you're probably behind the curve. And, you know, I would encourage everyone in any organization to experiment with that. And depending upon your specific role, it's going to have different use cases. So I know a lot of engineers like to use Claude to help with code, and there's like Cursor and different applications that help AI enhance engineers' capacity. If you're in sales, like AI is really good at doing quick customer research before you hop on a call, understanding who are you going to be talking to, who their major competitors are, anything major that's happened in the news around them, marketing spend, all that stuff that's going to help inform your conversation. If you're a content creator or a podcast host doing prep and research on what you're going to talk about, again, it's still a human in the loop, but I think it just expedites a lot of stuff that were probably 4 or 5 or 6 Google searches are now done a lot faster. So there's like a personal use case for every single individual at your organization. Then I would say there's like the horizontal and vertical strategy. So like a vertical strategy is like, okay, how does AI change the function of finance as we know it? And like, can we have AI like close the books in a day instead of a week? And like, what technologies are out there that a finance team should be embracing that are powered by AI or automation, or just broadly having a technology strategy that's vertical, I think is super important. And if you're a department lead, you should be thinking about that. And then there's horizontal technologies that are probably have always been around and are probably enhanced a little bit by AI. And I think AI like gets people really worked up. So just thinking about this as like a broad technology strategy is sometimes more important. But like take Glean, for example, which you can connect all your different tools to. I would say that's like a horizontal layer where like every single person, no matter where they are, can use that tool in a different use case, but it's plugged into everything and can really like supercharge their individual productivity. And it's not confined to one specific vertical. So like I think chief of staffs are uniquely able to influence what that horizontal AI strategy is because you have broad insight across the organization and can assist with deployment on the vertical side. And then for media in particular, again, like I could talk about this for a while, but you know, media is unique where it's like we're also creating content. And that's where I think AI is probably viewed the most with like skepticism And, I think you have to really understand why your audience is coming to you. If you are building like really high affinity brands that are human led, we have creators like Money with Katie, we have The Daily Show with Neil and Toby. People love those brands because it feels human and they feel like they know, and in some cases they do know Katie personally, and it's her voice and it's her tone and it's an actual person you want to be more like. Like, okay, then AI is probably not going to really work there because the core prop is that it's human and high affinity, and I don't think has that. If you're like a straight up utility brands, like I don't care who the person is typing the news or typing up these notes, or, I don't even care really about the brand. Like I just want the best news to help me do my job better. Okay, in some ways, like I could be more convinced that there is AI out there that can do that faster and more efficiently, more comprehensively. And that might be okay if it's like a pure utility play. And then obviously, like all the previous things I was talking about use cases, I think can assist in the content creation. So we have like obviously a ton of journalists at Morning Brew. ProPublica just put out a great piece sometime this year about how they're using AI. And a lot of it was to help their journalists comb through data sets that would take a human forever to comb through. And now they can comb through it super, super fast. And so it's like actually supercharging what a journalist should and ought to be doing, which is like finding really powerful data in databases and using that to tell a really compelling story to the public that matters. And so before, like maybe there is a gem or like, there's fraud or there's something going on in a data set that just a human would take too long to uncover. Now an AI can uncover that, but it's still upon the journalist to know which data set to look at, to intuit the results, and then to tell the compelling story that gets the public to react and be impactful. So yeah, I think it could supercharge it in some ways. And then always there's just the fear of AI slop, like putting stuff out that just AI does and is shitty. Like, yeah, don't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it was Kevin Kelly that wrote or talked about the sort of centaur, where you leverage AI to augment your skills, be it a journalist or, chief of staff or whatever. You can really amplify yourself if you learn to use AI as a teammate, right? And I think that's going to be super important. How do you see the adoption side of things? The change, the fear, the uncertainty people are feeling, as they hear about these changes, or as you go about integrating, new technologies and workflows in the business?
Yeah, I think like any change management, it is tough. And, I think a lot of people are skeptical that these tools even work. And or are scared that like they could be replaced by the tool. And, people like to have a job and a paycheck. So that is totally reasonable as well. So to the greatest ability you can, like be transparent about what the company is thinking about with these tools. And, I would hope that the goal is like, again, like supercharging current employees and not like a reduction in headcount. I will say, like broadly, not speaking for Morning Brew, but broadly, I do think when people are like, oh, AI like won't take away jobs, I do think that is a little false. Like, I don't think it's going to like force companies to like lay off people currently, but I do think if you have like supercharged divisions because of AI, you might hire less.
Yeah.
And so it's not necessarily taking away jobs that people currently have, but it's not offering new opportunities for people looking for work. So I definitely think that is like a fair concern as well. And in general, I am a believer that like technology gives more opportunity than it takes away across the entire economy. But granted, it can be highly disruptive to certain functions, industries, roles of the economy. And that's not to take away from the real pain and suffering that can cause the people who it is disrupting. And I think oftentimes we gloss over that fact and talk very abstractly. Well, this is positive for society, so everyone should be okay with it. And, if you're the part of society that it's not okay, I think you have every right to be concerned about it. And we as a society should make sure that those people are taken care of at some level.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Excluding AI for 1 minute, have you got any advice for people on how to future proof their role as a chief of staff?
Yeah, future proof your role as a chief of staff. I mean, make your job less fuzzy. So continuously be able to quantify value. I think, as the company goes, so goes your career a little bit. So if you can attach to a great company, a great team, a great leader, I think that's very important because, it's like when the tide is out or when the tide is out, I think you have more room to experiment. If you're working for a company where the tide has to come in, then the famous Warren Buffett quote, you figure out who was swimming naked and people have to make tough decisions. And that isn't necessarily a place you want to be. And then, I mean, staying abreast of like the new tools, the new technologies, the new strategies, like those think people that remain exceptionally curious throughout their career are the ones that, stay dynamic and stay adaptable and stay resilient because you're glued to the now and you're not stuck in the past. And those people who think, okay, I'm a senior leader, so I can be done learning, like those are the people that, end up, I think, left behind in a tough spot. And you want to avoid that.
Yeah, love that. Especially curiosity side of things. That's super important. All right, Kyle. This has been incredibly insightful. We're coming to our end of our time together. But before we wrap up, any final thoughts or tactics you want to pass on to our listeners?
No, this was great. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure to chat with you. And if people want to reach out, LinkedIn, Kyle Hagge, Hagge, feel free to reach out, or Kyle@morningbrew.com. Thanks for having me, Rob.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes. Thank you very much, Kyle. Have a great
Of
day.
course. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.